The rain was relentless, pouring over the city like it wanted to wash it away. The neon lights from the diner's windows flickered across the wet pavement, painting streaks of red and gold on the water that ran along the curb. Lena knelt there on the sidewalk, her white uniform soaked through, clinging to her trembling body. Beside her stood Daniel, her 7-year-old son, wearing a yellow raincoat far too big for him, his face half hidden by the hood. In front of them, a man in a dark suit. Crouched down, his hair plastered to his forehead by the storm, his eyes fixed on them with something between shock and pity. "Please." Lena's voice barely rose above the sound of the rain. "Please don't let them take my son." Her words cracked, desperate, raw, not a scream, but a plea from someone who had run out of options. Her hands shook as she reached for the man's, as though he were her last chance to hold the world together. Daniel clung to her side, his small hands gripping her sleeve, whispering through his tears, "Mommy, I'll be good. I promise." The man, Noah Grant, a name known in newspapers and boardrooms, froze, feeling something inside him fracture in a way he didn't understand. People passed by, umbrellas tilted against the storm, glancing for a second before moving on. Cars splashed through puddles, headlights slicing through the curtain of rain. The city didn't care. It never did. Noah had come here to escape his own thoughts after a long meeting, after a day filled with numbers and people pretending to matter. But as he watched this woman kneeling in the rain, clutching her son as though love itself could fight the system, he couldn't turn away. There was a quiet terror in her eyes, a defiance he hadn't seen in anyone for years, and before he could stop himself, he spoke. "Wait," he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm. The sound seemed to cut through everything. Through the rain, the traffic, even Lena's sobs. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes wide, meeting his gaze for the first time. He didn't know what to say next. He only knew that silence wasn't enough anymore. Something about her desperation, her raw courage, made him forget who he was supposed to be. The cold CEO, the untouchable man, suddenly felt human again. And it terrified him. Let's pause here for a second. I know your heart's probably racing right now. Remind us that sometimes compassion shows up when you least expect it. So before we find out what happens next, take a second to like this video, subscribe if you believe in stories that touch the heart, and tell me from where in the world you're watching right now. I love seeing how far these moments travel. Now, let's go back a few hours to understand how everything led to that moment in the rain. Earlier that evening, the diner had been warm and full of life. The smell of fresh coffee, the hiss of the grill, the laughter of customers escaping the weather outside. It was the kind of place where time slowed down just enough to feel safe. Lena moved from table to table with a tired smile, balancing plates and cups, pretending not to notice the looks from her co-workers. They knew what she was going through. Everyone did. She was behind on rent, behind on bills, behind on the impossible task of proving she was enough to raise her son alone. Daniel sat in the corner booth coloring with worn crayons, drawing superheroes on napkins and waiting for his mum to finish her shift. Every so often she'd sneak him a small cookie, whispering, "Don't tell anyone." It was their little secret, their stolen joy. But underneath her gentle smile, her chest ached with fear. The social workers had called again that morning, reminding her of the upcoming inspection, the one that would decide if Daniel stayed with her or not. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry in front of him anymore, but promises were harder to keep when the world kept breaking them first. Across town, Noah Grant was in his office, a place made of glass and silence. People feared him, respected him, envied him, but no one truly knew him. He had built his life around control, success, and the cold certainty that emotions were weaknesses. Yet lately, even victories felt hollow. That night, when the meeting ended and his reflection stared back at him from the boardroom window, he realized he didn't recognize the man he'd become. He got in his car and drove without a plan, until city lights gave way to rain and a flickering neon sign reading, "Open 24 hours." He stepped into the diner, seeking nothing more than coffee and quiet. He didn't notice the waitress right away, not until she smiled at him while refilling his cup, her tired eyes still carrying warmth. It was fleeting, but something about it stayed with him. Then the door opened again, and the two social workers entered, shaking rain from their coats, scanning the room for her. He saw the color drain from Lena's face before he even knew her name. She dropped the tray, and glass shattered against the floor. Every sound seemed to vanish. The world shrank to the sight of a mother kneeling, begging, her voice trembling as she pleaded for her son. Noah watched unmoving, his breath shallow. He'd seen bankruptcies, betrayals, and endings of every kind, but never this kind of heartbreak. Something raw and unfamiliar gripped him. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was humanity. Whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. The rain started again, harder this time, drumming against the windows. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky as if echoing her desperation. Noah stood up, his instincts fighting against logic. He didn't have a plan or a reason, only a feeling. That he couldn't stay seated while someone lost everything right in front of him. And when their eyes met again, he knew this was no coincidence. It was the beginning of something that neither of them would ever be able to walk away from. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the rain itself. Lena sat on the small bed in her apartment above the laundromat, holding Daniel as he slept against her chest. His tiny breaths were uneven, the kind that came after too many tears. She stared at the window, where the city lights flickered weakly through streaks of water. Every sound from the street below made her flinch, afraid it might be another knock at the door. Morning arrived pale and cold. Lena moved through her routine on autopilot, washing her uniform, combing Daniel's hair, making toast from the last 2 slices of bread. He smiled at her as if nothing had happened, as if children had a secret way of believing in better days. "We're okay, right, Mommy?" he asked softly. She forced a smile and nodded, though her throat tightened so much she could barely breathe. "We're okay, baby," she whispered. "We have to be." At the diner, everything looked the same, but nothing felt like it. The bell above the door chimed, the coffee machine hissed, and the regulars chatted as if life hadn't paused the night before. But Lena felt eyes on her. Curious, sympathetic, judgmental. The whispers traveled faster than the coffee refills. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone had their version of her story. She tied her apron tighter, stood a little straighter, and smiled as if nothing inside her was breaking. Around noon, the door opened again, and Noah Grant stepped inside. He was dry now, composed, the polished businessman once more. Yet something about him had changed. Maybe the way his eyes searched the room, or the hesitation in his steps. He took a seat at the same booth as before, setting down his phone but not looking at it. When Lena approached with her notepad, her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded. "Please." She poured the coffee, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The hum of the diner filled the silence, plates clinking, the low crackle of the radio, rainwater still dripping from the awning outside. Noah studied her as she worked, noticing the exhaustion in her movements and the strength she tried so hard to hide. "About last night," he said finally, his voice quieter than she expected. "You don't have to apologize," she replied quickly, cutting him off. "You didn't do anything wrong." He looked down, then back up. "That's the problem," he said. "I didn't." Later, when her shift ended, Lena found him still sitting there, untouched coffee gone cold. He stood as she approached, straightening his tie, searching for words. "That didn't sound like pity. Do you have anyone helping you?" he asked. She blinked, unsure how to answer. "Help comes with conditions," she said finally, "and I can't afford those either." He didn't smile, but something softened in his face. "What if it didn't?" he asked quietly. "What if it came from someone who doesn't want anything back?" Lena laughed, a tired, hollow sound. "People like that don't exist," she said. "Everyone wants something." She turned to leave, but Noah's voice stopped her. "Maybe I just want to understand why a woman would beg strangers to save her child and still show up to work the next day." The words hung between them, heavy and disarming. She met his gaze, unsure whether to feel seen or exposed. "Because," she said softly, "if I stop showing up, I'll lose him for sure." That night, when the diner lights dimmed and the streets filled with fog, Noah sat in his car for a long time, watching her through the glass. He told himself he wasn't getting involved. He'd seen pain before, and it never ended well. But something about her strength, the quiet kind that comes from desperation, wouldn't leave his mind. He wanted to believe he could just drive away. Instead, he stayed until the diner went dark. Inside, Lena cleaned the last of the tables, humming softly to keep herself from crying. The radio played an old song about lost chances and forgotten dreams. She looked at the clock. Nearly midnight. Daniel would be asleep upstairs, probably holding the little toy car he never let go of. She turned off the lights, her reflection briefly visible in the window, a woman who refused to break, even when life tried to shatter her. Noah didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew he couldn't go back to pretending he hadn't seen her pain. He'd spent years mastering detachment, believing success required it. Yet for the first time in a long time, he wanted to care. He wanted to change something, even if it meant crossing lines he'd drawn for himself long ago. As he drove away, the city lights reflected in the rain, and he realized he'd already crossed one, the line between watching and acting. That night, sleep didn't come easily for either of them. Lena lay awake listening to Daniel's breathing, afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Noah stared at his ceiling, replaying her words. People like that don't exist. He wanted to prove her wrong, but he didn't yet know how. Somewhere between guilt and curiosity, an idea began to take shape. He didn't understand it fully, only that he wasn't done with her story. Not yet. The Office of Child Protective Services smelled like old paper and disappointment. Lena sat in a hard plastic chair, clutching a folder of pay stubs and receipts that proved almost nothing. Across the desk, a woman with a polite smile and cold eyes reviewed her case file. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making every silence feel louder. "You're doing your best," the woman said, "but best isn't always enough." The words landed like stones in Lena's stomach. She tried to explain that she'd picked up extra shifts, that Daniel was healthy, safe, and loved. But the woman just nodded, typing something into the computer, her expression never changing. "We'll schedule another inspection," she said. "In the meantime, the agency reserves the right to intervene if necessary." Lena's throat tightened and her vision blurred. If necessary, two words that could erase her entire world. She forced a shaky smile, signed the form, and whispered a quiet "thank you" that tasted like defeat. Outside, the cold air bit her skin. She leaned against the building, breathing hard, her fingers trembling around the edges of the folder. The wind caught the top paper and tore it away, sending it down the street like a white flag. She didn't chase it. She just watched it disappear into the crowd, the symbol of everything she couldn't hold on to. Her phone buzzed with a message from her landlord. Rent due tomorrow. No extensions this time. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Just one more day." please." Across town, Noah sat in his office, staring at his computer screen, but seeing none of the numbers on it. His assistant, Caroline, knocked softly and stepped inside. "Sir, about the charity applications you asked me to review. There's one you might want to see." She placed a thin file on his desk. Noah opened it absently, then froze when he saw the name, Lena Moore. A request for emergency childcare support. No one had approved it. The note at the bottom read, "Application denied due to insufficient verification." Caroline hesitated. "She's one of those cases, isn't she? The ones that get lost in the system?" Noah didn't answer. He turned the file over in his hands, feeling something unfamiliar. Anger. Not at her. At the system. At the apathy. At himself for walking away that night. "Find her," he said suddenly. Caroline blinked. "Sir, the waitress from the diner. I want to know everything about her situation." His tone left no room for questions. Caroline nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Lena spent the rest of the day trying to stay busy. The diner was her shield. As long as she kept moving, she didn't have to think. But every time the door opened, she jumped, half expecting to see a police officer or a social worker with another notice. By evening, her hands ached, her back throbbed, and her heart felt like it was running out of rhythm. When she finally looked at the clock, her shift was over, but she couldn't make herself leave. Going home meant facing the truth. That night, as Daniel slept, Lena sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of overdue bills. The numbers mocked her. No matter how she rearranged them, they never added up to enough. She thought about the strangers who made decisions about her life, about the look in their eyes when they said, "We understand." They didn't. No one did. She pressed her palms to her face and whispered, "What more do they want from me?" Then she heard the soft knock on the door. When she opened it, Noah was standing there, the same man from the diner. Dressed in his perfect suit, now holding a folder instead of coffee. The sight of him in her doorway made her freeze. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said quietly. I wanted to talk." Lena's first instinct was suspicion. "Why?" she asked. "Because you felt sorry for me?" He shook his head. "No, because I can help you." His voice wasn't cold this time. It was steady but almost gentle, and that scared her more than pity ever could. The small apartment seemed to shrink around him. The peeling wallpaper, the flickering light, the single couch too small for two. He noticed the stack of bills on the table but didn't mention it. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "People like you don't come to places like this." Noah looked at her, really looked, and said, "Maybe that's the problem." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was Daniel's soft breathing from the bedroom. When Noah finally left, Lena stood by the door long after it closed. She didn't trust him, not yet, but something about his presence lingered like warmth after a storm. Maybe he was just another man who would make promises he couldn't keep. Or maybe, for once, the world had sent her someone who meant them. She didn't know. But that night, for the first time in weeks, she let herself believe there might still be hope. The next morning, Lena's reflection in the mirror looked older than she remembered. The sleepless night had carved shadows beneath her eyes, and her hands still shook as she buttoned her uniform. Daniel watched her quietly from the bed, clutching his toy car. "Are we in trouble again?" he asked softly. She forced a smile, smoothing his hair. "No, sweetheart. We're just trying to fix things." But even as she said it, she didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending. Across town, Noah sat in his office, a file open on his desk. Had pulled every record she could find. Caroline, the missed rent payments, the denied support applications, the school notes about Daniel's attendance. Each line made his stomach twist tighter. He wasn't used to feeling powerless, but that's exactly what this was. Watching a system designed to break people who already had nothing. He closed the file and stared out the window. The city below was alive and indifferent. He decided he wouldn't be. By noon, Lena was back at the diner, taking orders with mechanical precision. Her manager avoided eye contact, probably afraid of the drama her life had brought to his restaurant. When the bell above the door rang, she looked up instinctively, and her heart skipped. Noah was there, wearing a dark coat, his presence somehow out of place among the chrome stools and chipped counters. "You again," she said, more weary than surprised. He offered a small nod. "I need 10 minutes of your time." He waited until the crowd thinned before speaking. "I have a proposal," he said carefully, "not a handout, a job." She froze, unsure whether to laugh or get angry. "A job?" "Yes, personal assistant. Temporary if you want. It pays well enough to settle what you owe." Lena shook her head immediately. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you show up, even when everything's against you." His tone carried no arrogance, just conviction. The offer hung in the air, impossible and tempting. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You don't owe me anything." Noah looked down at his coffee, then back at her. "Maybe not," he said, "but someone once helped my family when they didn't have to. I never paid that debt. Maybe this is my chance." He didn't tell her that he'd already begun to suspect the truth, that the woman who helped his dying father years ago might be the one sitting across from him now. Lena's chest tightened. Pride told her to refuse, but fear whispered she couldn't afford to. "I don't want pity," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not pity," Noah replied. "It's opportunity." He slid a card across the table. "Come to this address tomorrow. Think about it. If you decide no, I'll walk away." She stared at the card. Embossed letters, clean edges, a world far from hers. He stood to leave, nodding politely. "You have until tomorrow." That night, he said softly, Lena sat by the window
I
while
hope you'll
Daniel
say
slept,
yes.
turning the business card over and over in her hands. The rain had started again, light this time, tapping softly against the glass. She imagined herself in that glass building, surrounded by people who spoke a language she didn't understand. Confidence, control, wealth. She didn't belong there. But then she looked at the stack of bills, at the eviction notice peeking from beneath them, and knew belonging was a luxury she couldn't afford. Morning came, grey and uncertain. Lena walked Daniel to school, kissed his forehead, and promised she'd be home by dinner. Her feet carried her toward the address on the card before her mind could talk her out of it. The building rose above the city like something untouchable, its mirrored surface reflecting everything she wasn't. Inside, the air smelled of polished floors and quiet power. The receptionist looked her up and down before handing her a visitor badge. "Mr. Grant is expecting you," she said. Noah's office was large, open, and painfully precise. He stood as she entered, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the waitress and the CEO, two worlds colliding in silence. "You came," he said simply. She took a deep breath. "You said it was a job, so tell me what it is." His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Work with me," he said. "Help me manage what I can't. And in return, I'll make sure no one takes your son again." Her breath caught, not from fear this time, but from the first flicker of hope. When she left the office, the city felt different, brighter, though she didn't trust it yet. The offer wasn't safety, not really, but it was a chance. For someone like Lena, that was more than enough. As she stepped into the sunlight, the card still clutched in her hand, she whispered to herself, "Don't mess this up." Somewhere. Behind her, Noah watched from the window, wondering when he'd started caring. and knowing there was no turning back now. Lena's first week at Grant Industries felt like stepping into another planet. The elevators whispered instead of creaked, the coffee smelled expensive, and everyone walked with a purpose she didn't yet understand. Her small cubicle overlooked the skyline, more than she'd ever dreamed of, less than she could handle. Each morning, she straightened her borrowed blazer, told herself to breathe, and hoped no one would notice how out of place she was. But Noah noticed. He always did. He kept his distance at first, watching quietly from behind his glass office wall. She worked harder than anyone he'd hired, filing documents, answering calls, staying late when others rushed home. Yet behind her polite "yes, sir" and professional smile, he saw something deeper. A quiet determination that came from necessity, not ambition. There was no trace of the woman who had begged in the rain. There was only focus, restraint, and an invisible armor that came from survival, and it fascinated him more than he cared to admit. One afternoon, while reviewing reports, Noah's mother stopped by his office, an elegant woman with the same piercing eyes, but gentler. "You're working too hard again," she teased, setting a folder on his desk. "And your new assistant, she's very grounded." He smiled faintly. That's one way to describe her. His mother hesitated, glancing at the nameplate outside. "What did you say her name was again?" "Lena Moore." The color drained from her face. "Lena Moore?" she repeated quietly, her voice unsteady. Noah frowned. "You know her?" His mother nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "Years ago, your father mentioned a waitress who cared for him in his final weeks. He said she worked in a small diner off Route 17. Her name was Lena." Clutching the arm of the chair, he said she had kind eyes, that she reminded him what love looked like, even when he was dying. Noah stared at her, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. "That's impossible," he said. "That was 17 years ago," she finished softly. That night, Noah couldn't focus on anything. The numbers on his screen blurred into meaningless patterns. He found himself opening old folders, searching through files he hadn't touched since his father's death. Buried deep among hospital records and business documents, he found a handwritten note, his father's final message to him. "If you ever forget what kindness looks like, remember her. The woman with the gentle eyes." Noah leaned back, the words burning in his chest. It couldn't be the same Lena, could it? Meanwhile, Lena sat alone in her small office, finishing reports long after everyone else had gone home. The city glowed beyond the glass, each light a reminder of how far she'd come and how far she still had to go. She didn't know that somewhere above her, Noah was piecing together their past. She only knew that she finally felt something she hadn't in years: stability. Yet even that, she feared, was fragile. Her phone buzzed, a reminder of Daniel's parent-teacher meeting tomorrow. She smiled faintly and whispered, "One step at a time." The next morning, Noah called her into his office. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried something she couldn't read. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair. She obeyed, clutching her notepad like a shield. He hesitated before speaking. "My father, did you know him?" The question startled her. "Your father?" she repeated. "I don't think so." But her voice wavered slightly, just enough for him to notice. He nodded slowly. "He used to go to a small diner off Route 17, he said quietly. "He mentioned a woman named Lena who helped him. He said she saved him." Lena's breath caught. Her mind flashed back to a frail man with tired eyes who used to sit in the corner booth, always asking for extra sugar in his tea. He had told her stories about his son, brilliant, ambitious, too serious for his age. When he passed away, she'd cried for days. She hadn't known his last name. "Your father," she whispered, her voice trembling. He used to come in every Friday. He said you'd change the world." Noah swallowed hard, his throat tight. He was right. She added softly, "You did. Just not the way he hoped." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. For the first time, Noah saw beyond her circumstances. He saw connection, history, fate. "He remembered you," he said, even at the end. Tears glistened in Lena's eyes. "He was kind to me when no one else was. I never forgot that." Noah nodded, struggling to speak. The weight of guilt and gratitude tangled inside him like a storm. "Maybe," he said finally, "it's my turn to return the kindness he once received." That night, when Lena left the office, the city lights shimmered like falling stars reflected on wet asphalt. She walked to the bus stop with a strange warmth in her chest. Not romantic, not yet, but deeply human. Somewhere inside her something had shifted, and in the high glass tower above, Noah watched her disappear into the crowd, realizing he wasn't helping her out of charity anymore. He was trying to understand what she'd awakened in him, something his father had called the power of compassion. Noah didn't sleep that night. The rain returned, tapping softly against the glass walls of his apartment like a metronome for his thoughts. His father's words echoed in his mind, refusing to fade. "If you ever forget what kindness looks like, remember her." He poured himself a drink he didn't touch, staring at the open box. Of his father's belongings, letters, faded photos, and finally a small leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with time. Inside lay truths he wasn't sure he was ready to face. He flipped through the pages slowly, his father's neat handwriting guiding him through memories of hospital rooms and lonely nights. Then he found her, Lena. There were pages about her, about the waitress who brought him tea when he couldn't sleep, who laughed softly at his old stories, who never treated him like a dying man. "The woman with the kind eyes," his father had written. "She reminded me that love doesn't need a reason, only courage." Noah's throat tightened as he read. His father hadn't left him money or advice. He'd left him her. At the office the next morning, Noah looked different. The same sharp suit, the same precise gestures, but something softer lingered behind his eyes. He arrived dearly, waiting by the window when Lena stepped in, carrying files and a shy smile. "Good morning," she said, placing papers on his desk. "Morning," he replied, his voice lower than usual. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, almost impulsively, he asked, "Do you still drink tea with too much sugar?" Her eyes widened, and for a second she saw his father's smile in his. The question caught her off guard, unlocking memories she hadn't revisited in years. "He told you that?" she whispered. Noah nodded slowly. "He told me about you. Just not enough." She lowered her gaze, trying to hide the emotion rising in her chest. "He was a good man," she said softly, "one of the few who ever saw me." Noah leaned back, the faintest smile on his lips. "He said the same about you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Two souls connected by the same ghost. Later that day, Lena took her lunch break in the company garden, filled with quiet hedges and soft wind chimes. She sat beneath a maple tree, unwrapping a sandwich she couldn't taste. From her bag, she pulled a photo, a picture of Daniel smiling, missing 2 front teeth. She whispered, "We're gonna be okay, baby," though she wasn't sure if she believed it. When she looked up, Noah was standing at the balcony above, watching her from afar, holding his father's journal close to his chest. That evening, he couldn't stop himself from reading it again. Each entry revealed more about the man he'd lost and the woman his father had admired. "Lena brought me warmth on the days when the doctors only brought silence," one passage read. "She reminded me that people are still good." Noah closed the journal, realizing something profound. His father had found peace through her kindness. And now, years later, she had appeared again, in his life, in his building, in his reach. Maybe fate wasn't random after all. The next day, he invited Lena to join him for lunch, not as her boss, but as someone trying to understand her story. She hesitated, uncomfortable in the sleek restaurant where waiters whispered and menus had no prices. "I don't belong here," she murmured. "You do," he said simply. Over salads neither touched, he asked about Daniel, about her dreams before life got in the way. She spoke cautiously at first, but when she laughed, really laughed, he realized how rare it was to see her at ease. It struck him harder than he expected. When they returned to the office, the tension between them felt different, no longer awkward, but alive. A subtle current hummed beneath every exchange, every glance. Noah caught himself watching, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she smiled when talking about her son. It wasn't infatuation. It was something quieter, deeper, admiration wrapped in guilt. He reminded himself she was his employee, but his heart didn't care about rules. It only knew recognition. That night before leaving, Lena stopped by his office door. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the lunch, for remembering him." Noah looked up from his desk, surprised by the softness in her voice. "He would have wanted me to," he said. "He thought the world of you." She smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I thought the world of him too." And with that, she left. Her footsteps echoing through the quiet hallway, Noah like sat alone fading into memory. She was gone, the city lights flickering against the window behind him. He opened the journal once more, tracing his father's handwriting with his fingertips. "Love doesn't need a reason," it read again. He looked toward the door where she just stood and whispered, almost to himself, maybe it doesn't need permission either. For the first time in years, Noah Grant closed his laptop early. Not because he was tired, but because his heart was finally awake. For a few weeks, peace almost felt real. Lena had found her rhythm at the company, balancing work, motherhood, and the fragile calm that came from stability. Noah gave her space, but was always close enough to notice the small things. The way she smiled when she received a message from Daniel, or how she hummed quietly when she thought no one was listening. For the first time in years, both of them were breathing easier. But peace, Lena would soon learn, never lasted long for people like her. It started with whispers. A few co-workers noticed that the CEO's new assistant received more attention than most. A coffee meeting here, a closed-door conversation there. Nothing scandalous, but enough to stir suspicion. "She must be special," one intern joked near the elevator. By the end of the week, the joke had turned into gossip, and the gossip had turned into judgment. Lena could feel the shift in the air, the sidelong glances, the forced smiles. She told herself to ignore it. But rumors spread faster than truth. Noah heard it too. Caroline, his assistant, mentioned it one afternoon while organizing his calendar. "People are talking," she said carefully. "They think your relationship with Ms. Moore is personal." He looked up sharply. "Is it affecting her work?" "Not yet," she replied. "But the board will notice soon." Noah leaned back, silent for a moment. "Then let them notice," he said finally. But his jaw tightened, betraying the anger beneath his calm. He had built an empire on control, and now one rumor threatened to unravel it. That evening, Lena stayed late, finishing reports after most employees had gone home. When she stepped into the elevator, a woman from accounting entered behind her, pretending to check her phone. "Must be nice," she said casually, "getting the CEO's attention. Some of us have to work years for that." Lena froze, unsure how to respond. "It's not like that," she said softly. The woman smiled, a sharp edge in her tone. Of course it's not. It never is. The doors opened, and Lena walked out quickly, her chest tight with humiliation. When Noah found her the next morning, she was quieter than usual. He watched her type, her shoulders tense, eyes focused anywhere but him. "Something happened," he said, not asking but stating. She hesitated before answering. "People talk. It's fine. I'm used to it." He frowned. "You shouldn't have to be." "It doesn't matter," she said. "As long as I keep this job." The words hit him harder than she meant them to. For Lena, survival had become second nature, dignity optional, if necessary. That afternoon, a man in a grey suit arrived at the office. He wasn't a client or a partner. He was from social services. His badge gleamed under the lobby lights as he asked for Lena Moore. When she came down, confusion flashed across her face. "There's been a report," he said evenly. "Concerns about your employment, situation and its nature." The words twisted like knives. Around them, people slowed to watch. "That's absurd," she stammered. "I work here. I earn my salary." But he was already taking notes. "We'll be reviewing your case again." When Noah stepped out of the elevator and saw her surrounded by strangers, something inside him snapped. He crossed the lobby in long, deliberate strides. "Is there a problem here?" His tone was sharp enough to slice through the tension. The social worker turned. "Mr. Grant, this is a private matter." "Not when it happens in my building," Noah replied coldly. His eyes met Lena's, terrified, humiliated, and the sight of it ignited something primal. "You're finished here," he told the man. "If you want to discuss her case, you come through me." The social worker tried to protest, but Noah's glare silenced him. He turned back to Lena. "Go home," he said softly. "I'll handle this." She shook her head, trembling. "No, please, don't make it worse." "It's already worse," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. Around them, whispers rippled through the crowd like static. For the first time, the cold CEO looked anything but composed. He looked human, angry, protective, and afraid. That night, Lena sat by her window, staring out at the rain that refused to stop. She replayed the scene again and again. The faces watching, the shame. Noah stepping between her and the man who could take her son away. She didn't know whether to thank him or resent him. Every time he tried to help, her life became louder, riskier. "He doesn't understand," she whispered to herself. "He can't." But deep down, a small, stubborn part of her hoped he never stopped trying. Noah, meanwhile, stood in his office, city lights reflecting off the glass like shattered promises. Caroline entered quietly. "You can't protect her from everything," she said. "Watch me," he replied. His voice was low but certain, the kind of tone that once moved markets. Now it was fueled by something different, something dangerous. He looked down at the rain-soaked streets below and whispered to no one, "If they want a fight, they'll get one." And for the first time in his life, Noah Grant wasn't defending a company. He was defending someone who mattered. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It beat against Lena's windows like an accusation, as if the sky itself had joined in judging her. She barely slept, jumping at every sound, expecting another knock from the social worker. Daniel sensed her fear, though she tried to hide it behind smiles that didn't reach her eyes. "Mummy, are we in trouble again?" he whispered one night. She hugged him tightly. "No, baby, not as long as I'm here." But even as she said it, her voice trembled with doubt. At Grant Industries, whispers turned into silence, the dangerous kind. Meetings paused when Noah entered the room. Employees avoided eye contact. Defiance at the lobby had gone viral on social media, leaked by someone's phone camera. Cold CEO defends single mother employee. Some praised him for compassion, others called it recklessness. He read none of it, but he felt the weight of the consequences pressing against his chest. Still, he didn't regret it. What haunted him wasn't the scandal. It was her face, the way she looked at him before walking away. When he finally called her, his voice was careful, restrained. "Lena, please come to the office. We need to talk." She hesitated but went. The elevator ride felt endless, her reflection in the mirrored walls pale and anxious. When she entered his office, he stood by the window, hands in his pockets, posture rigid. "You shouldn't have done that," she said before he could speak. "You made it worse." He turned slowly, meeting her eyes. "I couldn't just stand there." "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "Every time someone tries to help me, I lose more." He stepped closer, but she moved back. "You think I can't fight my own battles?" she asked, anger spilling through her fear. "I've been fighting my whole life, Mr. Grant. I can't afford for you to make me your charity project." Her words hit harder than she intended, and guilt flickered across her face. Noah didn't flinch. "You're not a project," he said quietly. "You're the only thing that's felt real in a long time." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard, leaving her momentarily speechless. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, shaking the windows. "You don't mean that," she said finally, whispering. "You don't know me." Noah stepped closer again, his voice low but steady. "I know enough. I know you don't give up, even when you should. I know you've been punished for surviving. And I know that if I let them take one more thing from you, I'll never forgive myself." His words carried both anger and longing, a dangerous mix that made her heart race for all the wrong reasons. Lena turned away, crossing her arms as if to hold herself together. "You can't fix me," she said. "I'm not asking to," he replied. "I just want you safe." "Safe doesn't exist for people like me," she said bitterly. "It's borrowed until someone decides we don't deserve it anymore." The air between them grew heavy, the storm outside reflecting the one building inside the room. Noah exhaled sharply. "Then I'll make it permanent," he said. "I'll use every connection, every resource I have. I'll make them back off." She shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "And what happens when they turn on you too?" He hesitated. "Then let them." His tone was calm, but his jaw was tight, his eyes burning with resolve. "You can't keep doing this," she said, voice breaking. "You'll destroy everything you've worked for." "Maybe it's time something broke," he replied. The thunder outside cracked loud enough to make them both flinch. For a moment neither spoke. They just stood there, two people trapped in a storm of their own making. Lena finally moved toward the door, but paused. "Why are you doing this, Noah?" she asked softly. "Why me?" He hesitated, searching for an answer that made sense. "Because you remind me that I'm still human," he said. The simplicity of it struck her harder than any declaration could. She turned, tears blurring her vision. "Then maybe that's what scares me," she whispered. And before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him alone with the echo of thunder and the taste of regret. That night, Noah didn't go home. He stayed in his office, lights dimmed, rain streaking down the glass like veins of silver. Every choice he'd made, every line he'd crossed, came rushing back to him. For years, he'd lived in absolutes, success or failure, strength or weakness. But now, everything felt uncertain. He reached for his father's journal, opened to a familiar page, and read the words again. "Love doesn't need a reason, only courage." He closed it slowly, whispering, "Then give me the courage, Dad." Across town, Lena lay awake, listening to the rain. Daniel slept peacefully beside her, one small hand resting on her arm. She stared at the ceiling, torn between fear and something dangerously close to hope. Noah Grant had risked everything for her, a man who once claimed to feel nothing. She didn't know whether to push him away or hold on tighter. All she knew was that the storm hadn't passed. It was still building, louder now, inside both of them. Days passed, but the air between them didn't clear. In the office, they spoke only when necessary, short, careful sentences that avoided anything too real. Lena buried herself in work, her focus sharp enough to draw blood. Noah pretended not to notice her absence when she left early or skipped lunch. But he did. Every silence was a reminder of what he'd said, and of the look in her eyes when she walked away. The distance hurt more than any argument could have. For Lena, the quiet was safer. Words had consequences, and she couldn't afford more of them. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that keeping Noah at arm's length was the only way to protect them both. But every time she saw him pass by her desk, her heart betrayed her logic. He looked tired, distracted, almost hollow. And in those moments, she hated how much she cared. She'd promised herself never to depend on anyone again. But Noah wasn't anyone. At home, Daniel's laughter was her only light. He'd started drawing again, messy, colourful sketches of stick figures holding hands. One morning she found a new one taped to her fridge, a tall man in a suit, a woman with brown hair, and a small boy between them. The caption, written in Daniel's shaky handwriting, read, "My family." Her heart clenched. She wanted to tear it down, but she couldn't. Instead, she stood there for a long time, whispering, "He's not part of this world, baby. Not ours." In the evenings, Noah stayed late at the office, claiming to catch up on work. But he wasn't reading reports anymore. He was rereading her personnel file, the notes she'd written, even the small coffee stain on one page that reminded him she was real. The cold, calculated man who once saw life as a ledger now found himself missing the sound of her voice. He told himself it was guilt or maybe gratitude, anything but what it really was. Longing. Caroline noticed first. "You've been off lately," she said one morning, placing a cup of coffee on his desk. "Is it about her?" Noah didn't look up. "It's about the fact that I can't fix everything," he said quietly. "Some things don't need fixing," she replied. "They just need time." He almost laughed. "Time doesn't change the truth." Caroline tilted her head. "Maybe not, but it can change how much it hurts." Her words lingered long after she left. The next day, Lena avoided the main elevator, choosing the stairs instead. She didn't see Noah watching from the mezzanine, his expression unreadable. When their eyes finally met in the hallway later that afternoon, the moment was brief but electric. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry." She wanted to say, "I miss you." Instead, both said nothing, and the silence filled every inch of space between them. Sometimes, words weren't walls, silence was. That evening, Noah's phone buzzed, a text from Lena. "Daniel wanted to thank you for the books you sent. He's been reading every night." He stared at the message for a long time, unsure whether to reply. Finally, he typed 2 words, "Tell him I'm proud." He hesitated, then added, "And you too." He hit send before he could think better of it. Minutes passed. Then her reply came, "Good night, Mr. Grant." Formal, distant. It hurt more
Later
than
that
he
week,
expected. Lena walked into the office early, hoping to avoid him. But when she entered her cubicle, something caught her eye, a folded note resting on her keyboard. In Noah's handwriting, it read, "Some walls protect us, others keep us prisoners." She stared at it, heart pounding. No name, no signature, just the truth written in ink. She slipped it into her pocket, unsure whether to be angry or moved. Either way, it stayed with her all day. That night, Lena dreamed of the storm, the thunder, the rain, his voice saying, "You remind me that I'm human." She woke up with tears on her cheeks, sitting up in bed as dawn filtered through the curtains. She didn't know what hurt more, the distance between them or the closeness she couldn't undo. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "Don't fall, Lena. Don't you dare fall." But her heart, traitor that it was, already had. Meanwhile, Noah sat alone in his office, the city glowing faintly below. He stared at the skyline and thought about his father's words again. Love doesn't need a reason. Maybe not, but it needed timing, and theirs was all wrong. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what he couldn't say. Somewhere deep down, he knew the wall between them wasn't made of fear or pride. It was made of love that neither of them was ready to admit. The letter arrived on a Friday morning, tucked between bills and advertisements, almost invisible, until Lena saw the seal. Her hands shook before she even opened it. The words were polite, official, and devastating. A custody hearing has been scheduled. Failure to provide proof of stable housing may result in permanent guardianship reassignment. The paper slipped from her fingers and drifted to the floor. Daniel's laughter from the next room made the silence that followed unbearable. She sank to her knees, pressing her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. It wasn't fair. She'd done everything right. Worked double shifts, paid what she could, stayed out of trouble. But the system didn't care about effort. It only cared about proof, and proof was expensive. That night she sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out like a wound. Every number she wrote down betrayed her. No matter how she calculated, she couldn't afford an apartment before the hearing. The walls seemed to close in. At Grant Industries, Noah noticed her absence before anyone else did. When she arrived late, eyes red, shoulders trembling, he didn't ask. He just watched her move through the office like a ghost. At lunchtime, he called her into his office. "What happened?" he asked softly. She hesitated, but the truth spilled out before she could stop it. She showed him the letter, her voice breaking halfway through. "They're going to take him," she whispered. "Unless I can prove I have a home by next week." Noah read the paper slowly, his jaw tightening. "That's not going to happen," he said. "We'll find a way." She shook her head. "There isn't one." "There is," he said firmly, standing. "Move into my penthouse, temporarily. I'll draw up a lease, make it legal. You'll have proof of residence." The offer hung between them like lightning. Bright, dangerous, impossible to ignore. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice barely audible. "You'd risk your reputation for this?" He met her gaze. "For you?" "Yes." Lena stepped back, stunned. "Do you have any idea what people will say?" she asked. "They already talk. This will destroy you." Noah's eyes softened, his tone steady. "I've already been destroyed, Lena. You just helped me realize it." She turned away, fighting the sting of tears. "I can't accept this." "You can," he said, "and you will, because this isn't about me. It's about Daniel." His voice cracked slightly at the boy's name. "Let me help you protect him." That night, Lena couldn't eat. She sat by the window, staring at the city below. Every option felt wrong. Pride told her to refuse. Fear told her she had no choice. She thought about Daniel, his drawings, his laughter, his belief that his mom could fix anything. "What kind of mother accepts charity from a man like him?" she whispered. But deep down, she knew the answer. The kind of mother who would do anything to keep her child safe. When morning came, she dressed in silence. Daniel tugged at her sleeve. "Are we moving again, Mommy?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maybe just for a little while," she said softly. He grinned. "Do we get a new place?" "Yes, baby," she whispered, forcing a smile. "A beautiful one." As they left the apartment, she didn't look back. Some places didn't deserve goodbyes, only escape. The penthouse was nothing like she imagined. Glass walls framed the skyline, and everything gleamed like it had never been touched by human hands. Daniel ran through the rooms laughing, his voice echoing off marble floors. Noah stood by the window, watching them. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "This isn't a favor." "Then what is it?" she asked. He paused. "Maybe redemption." She looked at him, unsure whether to believe him or herself. That night, Lena lay awake in the guest room, unable to sleep. The city lights spilled across the floor, painting her thoughts in shades of gold and doubt. She could hear Daniel breathing softly in the next room. For the first time in months, he was safe. But safety, she knew, came with a price. She whispered into the dark, "Don't fall for him. Don't make this harder." But her heart, weary, grateful, alive, refused to listen. In his own room, Noah stood at the window, watching the same sky. For years, success had been his measure of worth. Now, it was the sound of laughter down the hall. He knew what people would think, what he might lose, but it didn't matter. Somewhere between pity and love, he'd made his choice. He closed his eyes, hearing the faint sound of Daniel's voice calling his mother. For the first time, Noah Grant felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The first night in Noah's penthouse felt unreal. Lena stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a moving painting. Daniel's laughter echoed down the hallway as he explored the rooms, opening doors, counting lights. Noah watched quietly from a distance, unsure whether to speak or stay invisible. For a man who'd conquered everything, he suddenly didn't know what to do with his hands or his heart. Lena tried to act composed, but her body betrayed her. Every sound, the hum of the elevator, the ticking clock, the softness of the carpet beneath her shoes, felt foreign. "It's too much," she whispered, looking around. "It's temporary," Noah said gently. "Think of it as a roof, not a palace." She almost smiled. "For you, maybe." He wanted to tell her she deserved more than roofs, more than survival, but he didn't. Instead, he offered, "I'll give you space." It was the kindest lie he could manage. Days passed, and routines began to form. Mornings smelled of coffee and toasted bread. Evenings glowed with the city's amber light. Daniel adored the view. Every night he pressed his hands against the glass, pointing at airplanes, naming their stars. Noah found himself joining him sometimes, listening to the boys' endless questions. "Do you think stars get lonely?" Daniel once asked. Noah smiled faintly. "Maybe, but then someone notices them, and they shine a little brighter." Lena, hearing from the kitchen, paused. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. As days turned into weeks, the distance between Lena and Noah grew smaller, not in words but in gestures. She started leaving notes on his desk, reminders, schedules, small thank yous written in neat cursive. He, in turn, began cooking on weekends. Nothing fancy, but enough to make the penthouse smell like home. One night, she found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, completely lost, trying to make soup. "You're burning it," she said, laughing softly. He looked up, smiling. "I was hoping you'd stop me." They ate together that night, quietly, naturally, as if they'd been doing it forever. Daniel fell asleep on the couch, halfway through dinner, his head resting on Noah's arm. For a long time, they just sat there, watching the boy sleep. "He trusts you," Lena said softly. "That's rare." Noah looked at her, his voice low. "He shouldn't. I don't deserve that kind of trust." "Maybe not," she replied, "but you earned it anyway." Their eyes met, and something in the air shifted, fragile, dangerous, undeniable. Later that week, she wandered into the living room, drawn by the city lights. To her surprise, Noah was there, sitting by the window with a glass of wine, reading his father's journal again. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "No," he said. "The city's too loud when it's quiet." She smiled faintly, sitting across from him. "Your father wrote beautifully," she said. He did, Noah replied. He believed in people more than I ever could. Maybe you just needed someone to remind you why, she said. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full, alive. Noah closed the journal slowly, looking at her. He would have liked you, he said. No, she whispered, smiling. He would have liked that you're finally talking about him. The words disarmed him completely. For a moment, he wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to thank her for bringing warmth back into his world. But the fear of losing control, the one thing he'd always mastered, kept him still. Instead, he said, "You should rest." "You too," she replied, though neither of them moved. The next day, something changed. The tension between them was no longer hidden. It lingered in every glance, every brush of hands when passing papers, every laugh shared at breakfast. Even Daniel felt it, though he couldn't name it. "You smile more now," he told his mother one morning. "Mr. Noah makes you happy." Lena froze, spoon mid-air, unsure how to respond. "He's just kind," she said, forcing a smile. But when she looked toward the kitchen, Noah was already there, pretending not to have heard and failing. That evening, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, another storm brewing. Lena stood on the balcony, arms wrapped around herself, watching the rain blur the city below. Noah joined her quietly, offering a blanket she didn't ask for. "You should come inside," he said. "It's cold." "It's peaceful," she replied. He hesitated. "So is silence, until it starts hurting." She turned toward him, meeting his gaze. "Then maybe we stop being silent." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she stepped closer, and the world outside disappeared. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The storm broke above them, rain streaking down the glass, thunder rolling across the sky. Noah brushed a wet strand of hair from her face, his touch hesitant, reverent. She didn't pull away. For once, there was no fear, no logic, only the fragile truth of two broken souls finding warmth in the same storm. And as the city lights flickered around them, Lena realized she was no longer running. She had already fallen. The morning after the storm, sunlight poured through the penthouse windows, soft and golden, but peace never lasts. Lena woke to the sound of her phone buzzing non-stop. Dozens of notifications, her name trending online. She scrolled, her breath catching in her throat. CEO Noah Grant, involved with single mother employee. Charity or affair? Photos taken through the glass balcony. Her face, his silhouette, their closeness under the rain. The world had finally found its scandal. Down the hall, Noah's phone rang at the same time. "What the hell happened, Noah?" His lawyer barked through the speaker. "You're all over the news. The board's in chaos. They want a statement." He said nothing for a long moment, staring at the screen that showed the same photo. Lena, standing barefoot in the rain, eyes soft, trusting. He hung up without answering. For the first time in years, he didn't care about damage control. He cared about her. Lena paced the living room, shaking. "They twisted everything," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "They made it ugly." Noah approached slowly, voice calm but low. "Let me handle it." "No," she said sharply. "They already think I'm using you. If you defend me, it'll only prove them right." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I can't let you ruin your life for me." "You didn't ruin anything," he replied. "You gave it meaning." But she couldn't hear it. The fear was louder than his truth. By noon, reporters swarmed outside the building. Cameras flashed, voices shouted her name. "Ms. Moore, are you living with Mr. Grant? Is your son really his?" Questions cut through the air like knives. Lena shielded Daniel with her coat. Rushing toward the car as Noah's driver fought to clear a path, Daniel clung to her, crying, "Mummy, why are they yelling?" She forced a smile she didn't feel. They're just confused, baby. But deep down, she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince anymore. At the company, chaos reigned. The board demanded Noah's resignation, citing ethical violations and reputational risk. In the conference room, voices rose, fingers pointed, and old allies turned their backs. "You jeopardized everything," one director said. "You chose a waitress over an empire." Noah stood silent at the head of the table, eyes cold and steady. "I didn't choose a waitress," he said finally. "I chose what was right." Then he walked out, leaving a trail of stunned silence behind him. When he returned home that evening, the penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. Lena's belongings were gone. On the counter, a note written in her careful handwriting. "I can't let you lose everything because of me. Please don't look for us." Noah stood there for a long time, reading the same line over and over until the ink blurred through his tears. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that swallows even the strongest hearts whole. Lena had moved back into her old apartment, smaller, colder, but familiar. She told herself she was protecting him. That distance was the only way to survive. But the truth clawed at her in the dark. Every sound of the city reminded her of him, the low hum of traffic, the rhythm of rain against the window. "You did the right thing," she whispered to herself. But her chest ached like it disagreed. Daniel hugged her waist. "Are we safe now, Mommy?" She hesitated. "I don't know, baby. I really don't know." Days blurred into one another. The media frenzy calmed, but the damage was done. Her phone stopped ringing, except for calls from social services asking for explanations. The custody case was being re-evaluated, again. "Your current living situation raises concerns," the woman on the line said. "Your previous employer's involvement complicates things." Lena hung up before she cried. For the first time, she realized the truth. No matter how hard she fought, the world always found a way to punish her for surviving. Meanwhile, Noah's office sat empty. He ignored messages, investors, and headlines. The empire he built crumbled quietly behind him, and he let it. He spent his nights reading his father's journal, tracing the line that now haunted him. "The woman with the kind eyes saved me." He understood it now, not as gratitude, but as confession. His father had loved her for her kindness, and now Noah loved her for her courage. The difference was that his father had found peace. Noah had only found loss. 1 week later, a headline appeared. "Noah Grant resigns, cites matters of conscience." Reporters called it,
Noah didn't care.
"career suicide."
That same night,
He stood outside Lena's building, rain soaking through his coat, waiting for a light to turn on. None did. He whispered into the storm, "You wanted me to stop fighting. I can't." And somewhere inside that quiet apartment, Lena woke to the faint sound of rain, and the feeling that, somehow, the story wasn't over yet. The world had already moved on, but Noah hadn't. Weeks passed, resignation, and his name vanished from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals, fresher stories. Yet, in the quiet of his apartment, the silence screamed her name. He'd lost everything that once made him powerful, but for the first time, he felt free. The suit, the office, the title, none of it had ever mattered. What mattered was the woman the world had broken twice, and the son who still believed in her. One evening, Noah sat at his desk, surrounded by boxes of old files. Documents. From his father's foundation, donations, handwritten letters. In one folder he found what he hadn't known he was searching for, a thank you note, dated years ago, signed Lena Moore. It was brief. "Your kindness helped me keep my job when I needed it most. You saved my family." The foundation had once paid off a hospital bill for her, a secret gift his father had arranged. His throat tightened. Fate hadn't been coincidence. It had been legacy. The next morning, Noah walked into the local news station unannounced. The receptionist recognized him instantly. "Mr. Grant?" she stammered. "We weren't expecting—" "I'm not here for business," he said, placing a folder on the counter. "I'm here to tell a story." Hours later, cameras rolled. The interviewer leaned forward. "Mr. Grant, why did you resign?" Noah took a breath. "Because truth is worth more than image, and because the woman you called a scandal saved my father's life once, and mine too." The broadcast aired that night. Across the city, televisions flickered with Noah's face, but this time not the polished CEO, not the cold strategist, just a man, raw and human, speaking from the heart. "She was kind when the world wasn't," he said, "and I repaid that kindness with silence. Until now." He revealed the letter from his father, the journal entries, the photos. By the end of the interview, there was no doubt. Lena wasn't the woman the tabloids painted her to be. She was the reason 2 generations of Grants still had hope. In her apartment, Lena watched the interview frozen in disbelief. Daniel sat beside her, wide-eyed. "That's Mr. Noah," he said, smiling. "He's talking about you, Mommy." Tears filled her eyes as Noah's voice echoed through the room. "If compassion is weakness, then I hope we all become weaker." The crowd applauded softly on screen, but Lena barely heard it. All she could think was how he'd risked everything again, not for pride, not for control, but for her name. The next morning, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages from strangers flooded her inbox. Apologies, support, job offers. Even the social worker called, her tone different this time. "Ms. Moore, I saw the broadcast. I'd like to revisit your case. It seems there's more to your story than we realized." Lena pressed a trembling hand to her lips. For the first time in months, the future didn't look like a threat. It looked like a door finally opening. Meanwhile, Noah walked alone through the city. No security, no driver, just a man with time for once. He stopped at the small diner off Route 17, the same one where everything had begun. The smell of coffee and rain brought memories rushing back. He sat in the corner booth, the one his father had loved, tracing the cracks in the tabletop. For the first time in years, he smiled, a real smile, quiet and unguarded. Redemption, he realized, didn't come from victory, it came from surrender. Lena found him there that afternoon. She didn't call ahead, she just knew he'd be there. When he looked up and saw her, he froze, disbelief flickering across his face. She walked slowly to his table, every step trembling between anger and forgiveness. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "They'll crucify you." He smiled faintly. "They already did," her voice broke. "Why, Noah?" He leaned forward. "Because some truths deserve to be heard, even if it costs everything." They sat in silence for a long time, the hum of the diner filling the space his words couldn't. Then Lena reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't have to save me," she whispered. "I didn't," he said. "You saved me first." For a moment, the years of pain, pride, and fear melted away. They were just 2 people who had fought the world and somehow found each other again. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling warmth over the window. When they finally stood to leave, Noah walked her to the door, holding it open as Daniel came running from the car, calling her name. The boy hugged his mother, then turned to Noah with a grin. "You found us," he said. Noah crouched, smiling through tears. "Yeah, kid," he said softly. "I found you." And as Lena watched them, her son's arms around the man she once feared to trust, she realized redemption wasn't something you earned. It was something you gave, and finally, it was hers to give. The courthouse smelled of rain and nerves. Lena sat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel sat beside her, swinging his legs, unaware that the next hour would decide everything. Across the hall, Noah stood by the window, his suit perfectly pressed, but his eyes restless. He had offered to speak for her, but Lena had refused. "This is my fight," she'd said. "You've done enough." Still, he came, because some promises don't need words to be kept. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low whispers and the rustle of papers. The judge, a grey-haired woman with eyes sharp from years of cynicism, glanced between the case files and the trembling mother before her. "Ms. Moore," she began, "your situation has caused quite a stir." The attorney for child services cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the department believes the child would benefit from a more stable environment." Lena's chest tightened, but she didn't look away. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. When her name was called, she rose slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Ms. Moore," the judge said, "you may speak." Lena swallowed hard, her fingers trembling against the wooden podium. "Your Honor," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I'm not here to defend my mistakes. I've made plenty, but I'm here because my son deserves the chance to grow up with love, even if our version of it doesn't fit neatly into a report." Her words wavered, but her courage didn't. The lawyer from the opposing side smirked. "Love doesn't pay rent, Ms. Moore." The room chuckled quietly, but Lena didn't flinch. "No," she said, turning toward him. "But it's what keeps the lights on when everything else fails." The laughter died. She looked at the judge again. "I've worked every day, taken every shift, fought every label they've given me. All I'm asking is to keep doing that, as his mother." Her voice cracked at the last word, but it didn't matter. The truth was stronger than her fear. Then Noah stood. He hadn't been called, but the judge didn't stop him. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "if stability is the issue, then I'll say this. I've seen more strength in Ms. Moore than in anyone in my boardroom. She taught me that integrity isn't built on wealth, but on resilience. My company, my reputation, I lost them all, and I'd lose them again if it meant defending her character." His words echoed through the room like thunder finding its voice. The opposing lawyer rose angrily. "Mr. Grant, this is highly irregular." "So is compassion," Noah interrupted, eyes locked on the judge. "But that's why we're here, isn't it? To decide whether this child grows up knowing that people can be cruel or that they can be kind." A heavy silence followed. Even the judge seemed to pause, her pen hovering mid-air. In that silence, Lena felt something shift. Not in the courtroom, but in fate itself. The judge cleared her throat softly. "Ms. Moore," she said, her tone different now, gentler, "it's not often that we see someone speak for another with such conviction." She looked down at her notes, then back up. "You've shown this court what stability truly means. Perseverance, love, and character. I see no reason to separate mother and child." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. "Custody is restored." The words hit Lena like sunlight after years of rain. She gasped, covering her mouth as tears poured freely. Daniel jumped from his seat and ran into her arms. "We did it, Mommy," he shouted. She laughed through sobs, holding him so tightly it almost hurt. Noah stood a few feet away watching, his own eyes glistening. For the first time, he didn't need to save her. She had saved herself. He simply smiled, proud, relieved, and utterly undone. As they left the courtroom, reporters waited, flashing cameras and shouting questions. Noah stepped in front of Lena and Daniel, shielding them without a word. The world could speculate all it wanted. He didn't care anymore. Lena turned to him and whispered, "You didn't have to come." He smiled faintly. "Yes, I did." She hesitated, then took his hand, right there in front of everyone. For once, she wasn't afraid of being seen. Outside, The sky had cleared, the air smelling of rain and renewal. Daniel ran ahead, laughing, spinning in circles under the weak sun. Lena and Noah watched him, their fingers still intertwined. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Noah looked at her with a softness she'd never seen before. "Now," he said, "we start over. Not as savior and survivor, but as equals." For the first time in a long time, the world didn't feel cruel. It felt possible. Weeks had passed since the hearing, but the sound of the gavel still echoed in Lena's mind, not as fear anymore, but as freedom. The city seemed softer now, the air lighter. Her apartment, once filled with silence and worry, was now full of laughter again. Daniel painted the walls with childish joy, and every morning sunlight fell across their kitchen table like a promise kept. For the first time in years, Lena didn't wake up afraid. She woke up thankful. Noah had disappeared from the news by choice. He'd turned down interviews, sold his remaining shares, and left the skyscraper world behind. Some called it madness. He called it peace. He started consulting quietly for small charities, helping others rebuild what he once took for granted. But no matter how busy his days were, every evening he ended up in the same place. The small diner off Route 17, the place where everything had begun, waiting for the smell of coffee and the sound of a familiar laugh. One grey afternoon, Lena walked into that diner again, the bell above the door chiming like an old friend. She looked around, unsure what she expected. And then she saw him, sitting in the corner booth, a coffee steaming in front of him. He looked up at her, smiling softly, like he'd been waiting all along. "You found your way back," he said. She nodded, setting her purse down. "Or maybe I just stopped running." The space between them felt smaller than ever. They talked for hours, not about courtrooms or headlines, but about ordinary things. Daniel's drawings, the new apartment, the taste of freedom. For the first time, conversation felt easy, like the world had stopped demanding anything from them. When the waitress refilled their cups, she smiled knowingly. "You two look like you've seen a lot of storms," she said. Noah glanced at Lena, his voice low but steady. "We have, but we learned to dance in them." Later that evening, the diner began to empty. Rain started outside, not the cruel kind, but gentle, forgiving. Lena watched the drops race down the glass, her reflection soft in the window. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The power, the noise, the control?" Noah shook his head. "Power's overrated. Peace, that's harder to find. But you—" He paused, smiling faintly. "You make it easier." Her heart stirred, the words warming places she thought had gone cold forever. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Daniel appeared at the booth carrying his newest drawing, a man, a woman, and a boy under a big yellow sun. "It's us," he said proudly. Lena laughed, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's perfect, baby." Noah studied the paper like it was worth more than every contract he'd ever signed. "You're quite the artist," he said, "just like your mum." Daniel grinned. "Mum says—" "You helped us," he said innocently, "so you're in the picture too." When the bill came, Noah reached for it, but Lena placed her hand over his. "Let me," she said. "You've done enough." He smiled. "Then let's call it even." Their hands lingered longer than they should have. It wasn't romance yet, not the fragile kind that burns fast, but something steadier, built from scars and second chances. Outside, thunder rumbled softly, distant, almost kind. The world, it seemed, had finally learned mercy. As they stepped outside, the night air carried the faint scent of rain and jasmine. The streetlights reflected in the puddles like tiny stars fallen to earth. Daniel skipped ahead, his laughter echoing down the sidewalk. Noah held the door open for Lena, and for a moment she just looked at him, really looked. The man who had once been unreachable was now the most human soul she'd ever known. "Thank you," she whispered. He frowned gently. "For what?" "For hearing me when no one else did." They walked together in silence, the world around them settling into peace. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered. Love isn't loud. It's patient. It's in the hand that doesn't let go, the voice that says, "I'm here," even when the world isn't kind. At the corner, Lena stopped and turned toward him. "Do you think people can start over?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "I think we just did." The city hummed quietly around them, alive, forgiving, and new. Noah reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The world's finally quiet," he said softly. Lena smiled, looking up at him, the glow of streetlights painting her eyes gold. "No," she whispered, "it's finally listening." And as Daniel laughed under the drizzle and Noah's hand found hers, the past fell away. Some stories don't end with a kiss, they end with peace. And if this story moved you, if you felt every storm, every breath, every heartbeat, don't let it end here. Subscribe, like, and tell me from where in the world you've been watching. Because no matter where you are, kindness, like love, always finds its way back.